Okay, this online lecture is about whether or not Congress is getting the job done that we asked them to do in writing the laws, and also if they're not, what types of changes we could make as a country to make Congress get the job done. This is especially for those of you that missed because of the hockey game, so make sure you pay attention and take notes and ask any questions because these concepts will be on the test. So when we ask the question, is Congress getting the job done, this chart illustrates the percentage of bills that have been passed by different Congresses as a percentage of the number that are introduced. So if you notice, we talked about this earlier, in the 1950s, we had something like 27% of all the bills that were introduced were passed, and that number has steadily been declining down until 2012, when about 3% of the bills that are introduced have actually been passed by Congress. And this is illustrating a major problem that a lot of people have with Congress, is they don't seem to be getting the job done. So in this PowerPoint, we're going to look at 4 issues or problems with Congress and discuss how we could maybe fix them. So problem 1 we'll talk about is gridlock, which is when the government is at a standstill and doesn't get things done because Republicans and Democrats are fighting, or Congress and the president are fighting. Problem 2 we'll talk about is an incumbency advantage or an unfair elections. Problem number 3, the influence of money in Congress. And then problem number 4, the fact that Congress is not all that representative of the voting population. So with those problems in mind, let's jump into part 1. I showed you this chart earlier illustrating the number of bills that are being passed going down, and Congress, as you can see, is really not getting the job done, and a lot of people blame that on gridlock. Okay, a classic example happened just 2 days ago when the Senate was voting to approve an appointment by President Obama of John Brennan to be the CIA director. A senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, right, as you can see his name right here, stood up and filibustered that approval for 13 straight hours. He wasn't opposed to John Brennan's appointment as much as he was opposed to the way that the Obama administration uses what's called drone attacks to take out terrorist suspects, even American citizens. These drones are planes that fly thousands of feet in the air and drop bombs on people who are suspected terrorists. We've used them multiple times on American citizens that are in Afghanistan fighting on the side of Al-Qaeda. And the argument is that no American citizen should be killed by their government unless given a trial and proven guilty. So Rand Paul decided to filibuster for nearly 13 hours until until Obama and the executive branch agreed that they would never use drones in the United States. And at any rate, the end of the day, the thing that we need to understand, although that's could be a good idea for filibustering, at the end of the day, the Senate spent 13 hours listening to this conversation, and that's 13 hours that they did not spend on other really important things that are happening in our country right now, like sequestration, deciding how to fix the budget, all these other issues. So gridlock, things like the filibuster, really slowing Congress down. One of the things that we could talk about as a reform idea would be to reform the filibuster. This cartoon illustrates, it's from a long time ago, illustrates somebody filibustering, and this senator is trying to put a cork in the senator's mouth that says cloture, which you remember right is the vote to end a filibuster. He says, we can't use this cork without 2/3 of a vote from the Senate. And this person says, why isn't a majority vote, which would be 51 out of 100, enough? A long time ago, 2/3 was the number required for cloture, which was 67 votes. And that was nearly impossible to get to end a filibuster. So the Senate changed the rules to 60 votes for cloture, which is what it is today to end a filibuster. Some reformists think we should lower cloture again to 55. That would make it harder to filibuster. It would make it easier to end filibusters when they happen, and would maybe make Congress faster. But at the same time, in class we talked about, sometimes a filibuster can be really important. It gives the minority a strong voice, and lowering the cloture requirement would take away that power from the minority. Issue number 2, the incumbency advantage or unfair elections. An incumbent is somebody who's running for re-election. They've already held the office. And as you can see by this chart, in the House of Representatives, incumbents get elected all the time in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. If you average these out, you would see probably that around 92% of the time, 93% of the time, the incumbent gets reelected, which makes it really hard for any other groups to challenge and become members of Congress. That keeps new ideas out of Congress, it keeps diversity out of Congress, and poses some issues. One reform idea is that we have term limits. right, where we only allow senators and House members to be elected for X number of terms, let's say 3. So a senator could only serve for 18 years, a House member could only serve for 12. This sign, this sums it up, says diapers and politicians should be changed often, both for the same reason, right? Both of them get dirty and gross after a long time, a lot of people think. Spending a long time in Washington can some people fear, lead Congress people to become corrupted or to be out of touch with the voting public. Another reform idea would be to fix gerrymandering. So if you take a look at this map shows the 8 congressional districts in Minnesota. Remember, 1 representative comes out of each of these districts to represent that district, okay, and they go to the House of Representatives. And every 10 years, these districts are redrawn to provide for people that move either out of Minnesota or into Minnesota. If a lot of people moved to Minnesota, then we might get 9 districts instead of 8. All right? And it's the job of the state legislative branch, as we talked about in class here in St. Paul, to redraw these districts. So if the federal government gave Minnesota 9 seats in the House of Representatives, they would have to draw, the legislative branch in St. Paul would have to draw 9 districts. And right now, Democrats are in charge of the legislative branch. And typically, one of the issues we see is that whatever party is in charge will draw districts to benefit themselves. Now, you notice that Minnesota's districts are nice and normal looking. Gerrymandering, named after a guy named Eldridge Gerry, who drew a district that looked like a salamander, so it became known as gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when a district is drawn in a very bizarre way that doesn't make much sense in order to put certain people in a district. And this can help or hurt the chances of people getting elected. This is a district in North Carolina that would be a good example of a gerrymandered district. Let me give you another example. Let's imagine that, so first off, District 3 is Eric Paulson, who's a strong Republican. Okay? District 6 is Michelle Bachmann, who's another strong Republican. Imagine if Democrats drew new districts and they put Eric Paulson and Michelle Bachmann, where they live, in the same district. Now these 2 Republicans would be going against each other as opposed to winning their own districts, and one of them would lose. That benefits Democrats because there's one less strong Republican winning their district. So that's an example of gerrymandering, making elections unfair. One reform idea for fixing that is to, instead of having Democrats or Republicans, whoever's in charge of the state legislative branch, make decisions, we could have a nonpartisan, non-Republican, non-Democrat committee that draws the district lines, therefore making it easier for the public to be represented and for a non-incumbent or a challenger to win an election. Issue number 3 is the influence of money in Congress. If you look here, last election, the most expensive Senate race in the whole country was in Massachusetts. Between the 2 main candidates, they spent $82 million to try and get elected. In the House, the most expensive one was in Minnesota, District 6, between Michelle Bachmann and I believe Rick Nolan, where the 2 of them spent $25 million between themselves to try and get elected. At the end of the day, if you don't have a lot of money, it's going to be very hard for you to get elected. And if you need a lot of money in order to get elected, like you did in District 6 of Minnesota, you're going to need to get that money from either wealthy individuals or what we call interest groups, people that have a lot of money or companies that have a lot of money that can donate to your campaign or make commercials on your behalf. This cartoon illustrates a problem with that. Right? This politician saying, nobody tells me what to do or say, but you see that someone's writing in, called a lobbyist, what he needs to do or say. If I'm running for the House and I get a lot of donations from, let's say, the Target, the corporation, and people that work at Target, then I am somewhat on the hook to do favors for Target once I become a House member. Right? And that means that maybe they can tell me what to say or how to vote, because they gave me a bunch of money to help me get elected, and if I want to get re-elected, I'm going to need money from them again. One classic example we talked about in class is this guy, Jack Abramoff, who was a lobbyist that would go to Congress and would try and essentially buy votes from Congress people by getting donations and campaign contributions, by taking them on golf trips and on private jets. His goal was to try and influence how House members and senators voted. He eventually went to jail because what he was doing is illegal, but at the end of the day, money still plays a really big role in Congress. One way we could change that, a reform idea, would be to have public finance of campaigns. So tax dollars go to fund elections instead of private donations. Right? So this cartoon illustrates that. If you had public campaign money that you gave to people to spend, let's say every candidate gets $5 million to spend and no more, then that would decrease the importance of either millionaire candidates or interest groups or lobbyists like Jack Abramoff. Okay? And it would give other people an advantage to win campaigns. It would also take the corruption and money out of politics. But at the same time, it would be very expensive to decide how much money people should get, and it would be hard to decide who should get that money. If there's 6 people running for Senate in Minnesota, should all 6 of them get campaign finance money from the government, or should only the legitimate candidates? There's a lot of questions that would need to be answered with this reform. Issue number 4 is that Congress is unrepresentative of the voting population. Okay? This quote, I'm not going to read it all right now, but you guys can read it if you pause it, talks about how Congress is the government's most representative body. It's the branch of government that is most representative of the citizens. But upon further reflection, if we look at this, this is an illustration of the House of Representatives. Right now, there are 301 white men in the House. If the House actually reflected our current population, there would only be 162 white men. White men are overrepresented in Congress. Women, there are 81 in the House. If it was actually reflective of our population, there should be 218. African Americans, there are 42 in the House. If it was actually reflective of population, there should be 56. Hispanics, there are 28 in the House. There should be 72 if it was reflective. 12 Asians, there should be 22 if it was reflective. And then lastly, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered. There are 7 in the House. There should be 14 if it was actually reflective of our population. Now, at the end of the day, we can ask ourselves, does this really matter if Congress is reflective? Is it white men's fault that they're the ones that are getting elected? Isn't it the people who are voting for them? And at any rate, if we make the decision that there need to be more minority opinions and views in Congress, whether it be women, whether it be based on race, based on ethnicity, or based on wealth, then there are certain things we can do about that. Here's a couple other examples of new things in the Senate this year. Tim Scott from South Carolina is the first African-American senator to be elected in the South since the Civil War. Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin is the first openly gay senator. This is the first Buddhist senator who comes from Hawaii, the first Hindu senator that comes from Hawaii, the first state, New Hampshire, to have all women as their representatives and senators, the first female combat veteran to be ever elected to the Senate, and the first Senate with 20 female members. So these are all firsts this year, which is illustrating that diversity is going up in the Senate and in the House, but it's not reflective with our population. In terms of wealth, the average senator is worth around $14 million. The average House member is worth around $7 million, which is significantly more than the average American. So all these things together mean that Congress is not representative of our population. And one reform idea, although very radical, would be that we create quotas to guarantee certain groups of citizens have a seat in Congress. Right? A certain number of seats for women, a certain number of seats for minority groups or religious groups. In India, there's a classic example of this. Women have been marginalized in India for a long, long time. And 2 years ago, India decided that they would reserve 1/3 of the seats in their legislative branch, known as Parliament, for women. This guarantees women a voice so that they can protect their own rights. And some people think that we ought to do that in our Congress. So at the end of the day, we just discussed 4 issues with Congress, right? And we discussed reform ideas that might change them. On the test, I'll expect you to understand the basic ideas of these issues with Congress, as well as reform ideas on how we could change them. So make sure you took some notes on this. You come ask questions or email me with questions, and then get yourself ready for the test.